What's up, YouTube? Scott here with the 9 to 5 Gamer. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. My name's Scott, and as the title suggests, I'm a casual gamer with a 9 to 5 job. Growing up, I always liked to invest tons of time into video games. As I've gotten older, have a job, a family, it's just more challenging to do that. So the purpose of this channel is to really focus on games and things that you can just pick up and play. As much as I enjoy the new games with open worlds and awesome graphics, I just don't have the hours to learn all the mechanics and crafting systems. And if I put it down for too many days or a week, it's tough to want to get back into it. I'm guilty of buying brand new AAA titles and playing them for 10 hours over the course of a week and then never picking them back up. So that's gotten me back into my childhood, where I'm playing retro games or some new titles that are kind of independent games that are just more pick up and play friendly. So one of the things that I had to ask myself a couple years back when I started getting back into retro gaming is, do you emulate or do you use original hardware? So today I thought it might be awesome to bring you guys just a short video kind of comparing what it's like using emulation or original hardware when we're talking specifically about the Game Boy Advance. So in front of you I have my Anbernic RG351P and then a Game Boy Advance SP that's been just kind of refreshed with a new shell, new buttons, and a 3-inch IPS display. Now, so that brings me into kind of the first component when I think of playing some of these classic retro games. In this case, we're going to be comparing Pokemon Emerald, and that is the screen and the aspect ratio. So one of the things that the RG351P does very well is it is essentially the native aspect ratio that you would expect with the Game Boy Advance. So what I mean by that is there's no stretching of the image or no additional black bars around the screen, which is really important to me. Now, this has a 3.5-inch display, and this has a 3-inch display. So right out of the gate, that is one of the things that's a little bit more appealing about emulation, is you just have the ability to get a larger screen. However, I do enjoy the color of the traditional hardware better. Now, certainly if my SP did not have the IPS display, I don't think it would even be a comparison at that point, right? Because if you have a traditional Game Boy without the screen, you'll already know that the backlit is it's not very good, the backlight. So this is the V5 IPS display. The button essentially here will adjust the backlight. This has 7 different brightness settings essentially, to make it just a much more modern feel. So right out of the gate, although the screen is slightly larger, I do prefer the traditional colors and kind of that pixelated feel that you get from this screen. That said, if you're using something like RetroArch, you can absolutely put some shaders on here to kind of give you a better color feel of the traditional Game Boy. So the second item I want to get into, and this might sound funny, but it's a true statement. The first is just, what's it like to pick up and play? Okay, let's role play for a second. I'm going to go ahead and turn this console off here. And there is a right and a wrong way to turn these off. Sure, you could just hold the power button, but I always kind of go through the actual prompts here to turn them on and off. Now, this will be a little bit biased. It's going to depend on what operating system you're running, but let's just say I want to pull out one of these consoles and begin playing. Well, I'll just have to hit the power button here on my Anbernic device, which is there on the side, and I'll let it go through its boot phase. Well, I'm using what's called 351 Elec, which is essentially an operating system that I put on here. There's a few different options out there, but they all kind of have similar functionality. I just like the look and the settings of this front end. So right out of the gate, you'll notice this has gotten quite a bit of a head start. The Game Boy Advance SP, excuse my squeaky hinge there, flip the switch, and within a matter of seconds, we're gaming, right? We are already into the home menu here, and my Anbernic device is still turning on. Now, as I mentioned, this will be a little bit different experience depending on the exact console you're using to emulate, but this is an older device at this point. There's certainly newer variations to this nowadays, but this is an extreme comparison, but the time it takes to play, right? You can see this is still loading, this is still loading. Once it is online and at the menu, I'll have to navigate over and pick the console and the game, which we'll just go ahead and do so we can get them back to the same point. Like I said, this is probably exaggerated a little bit. My 351 elect could even be slightly out of date, but there's a lot more that goes into emulation behind the scenes to get one running. I'll go find my Game Boy Advance here, click on it, and now what's nice is I can obviously just scroll through all of the titles I've got here. And I'll go ahead and launch Pokemon Emerald. Now, one of the things that my front end does is it automatically goes to the last save state. So this is probably going to launch somewhere mid-game. I'm going to restart it and take you to the menu. So while that's loading, let's start talking about, here, I'll go ahead and hit reset here. So it gets us to the main menu. So let's talk about the next thing, which is kind of just cost of getting into this, right? And this is where we really might separate which one you prefer. Because, to be honest, original hardware, cheap to get into, but you're going to spend a little bit of money to kind of modernize, clean it up, and get a hold of titles. But I view that as a double-edged sword. So Game Boy Advance SPs you can pick up online from various price points. You might be able to find one as little as 50 to 60 bucks, 100 bucks, 150 bucks. It's going to depend on color, condition, age of the battery, things of that nature. And then once you've made that investment, this has essentially about an $80 display. I'll try to link the IPS display in YouTube here so you can pick up one if you'd like. I believe Amazon has them. Once the display's in there, you could potentially be $150 to $200 invested in the console here to use original hardware and a modern screen. This unit over here, again, I mentioned the RG351P is really, I don't know, you'd go out and buy a brand new one of these at this point because Ambernick has come out with tons of new models for similar price points with a little bit more firepower, but you're probably going to spend 50, 60, 70 bucks for an equivalent device, maybe just under 100, right? But that's before you've purchased any games. So with emulation, Nintendo, close your ears, you use ROMs, right? And of course you can get ROMs from various places that I'm not going to get into, right? If you're going to use original hardware, you've obviously got to go out and get cartridges. And you're going to find a mixture of cartridges online. There'll be authentic ones, and then there'll be games listed that just claim they've been tested, right? So there are people out there essentially flashing ROMs onto cartridges and then putting a sticker on it. So it's going to depend on what your preference is. Do you want to roll the dice with a cartridge that's been made by somebody, or do you go out and get the original stuff, right? And you're going to spend anywhere from maybe as cheap as $5 to $10 on a game, all the way up to, $50, $60, $70, or maybe even $100, depending on how popular the title is right now, right? So I view it as a double-edged sword for a few reasons. One is you could view it as an investment, right? Emulation, once you've made the purchase of the hardware, I mean, that's really it, right? As time passes, I don't necessarily see an era in which these go down in price. They might flatten for a while or gradually go up, but these are an investment. The second thing, which is going to sound silly, but I think it's more important to me now than I ever realized, is kids and other people these days just don't know what it's like to buy a game and really need to finish it before the next one, right? We live in an era of instant gratification. The generation of people playing video games right now for the first time don't know what it's like to have to ask your mom to take you to GameStop to buy a game, right? You can't just go download another one if you didn't like this one. So by investing in these cartridges, I'm almost investing in getting myself to play through all of the content. I have finished more games on the traditional hardware than I have with emulated hardware because of my emotional and financial investment in buying the actual cartridges. So take that with a grain of salt, and everybody feels differently about it. Second item to kind of chat about, and this will be subjective, is battery life, right? This SP also has a revised battery in it, or at least an updated one, and I can actually charge it with a USB cable. I don't think I have it near me, but there's an adapter that I can use to charge via USB. I get about 5 hours of playtime on this, and I would say I get about 5 hours of playtime on this. But that's only because this has a newer battery. I would say if you've got an original SP, maybe you don't get that kind of battery life anymore. As far as the how does it feel to play, you can't beat the nostalgia you get from the original hardware, but I would say in terms of build quality, it's going to depend on what you use to emulate. But I would say that these have very similar button feel and D-pad feel. I personally am not a huge fan of kind of this rectangle square shape. I have another Ambernick device on the way that I'm going to do a review with you guys that's a little bit more ergonomic to hold. These bumpers, in my opinion, are just not in a good spot. But I do like that the D-pad is higher, which is kind of is more geared towards 16-bit, kind of retro gaming. So I hope that kind of gives you guys a little bit of a comparison and maybe an idea of what you'd rather get into. If you're just getting back into retro gaming and you're not sure about if you're going to stick with it, pick up a cheap emulator, right? There's one other thing actually we probably should touch on before I wrap this up is just the initial setup, right? This is very straightforward. There's no settings. You pop in a cartridge, you flip it on, you play. You are going to be doing a bit of tinkering on an emulation device. They certainly come with their own firmware. They may come with a memory stick, but you've got to go download the ROMs, transfer them over, which for someone who spends time on a computer, it's super easy. But if you're a beginner and just looking to kind of relive some of that nostalgia, this could be easier to pick up and play. So, in summary, I started with emulation, and that's what really got me back into gaming. But as time passes, I've decided I further enjoy the investment into original hardware. So that's just my kind of feedback. If you guys enjoy this type of content, please subscribe, like, and follow along for the journey. I'm going to be doing reviews of some classic games that I think you should pick up. Like I said, I've got another emulation device here on the way. My promise to you guys is I'm not one of those big YouTubers that has a ton of time to invest in completing games to their full extent or playing 1,000 hours in a game. I want to bring you realistic, casual content for folks that game when life allows. So thanks for joining.